My son splashed hot coffee on me, shouting, "You're too old to answer me," and laughed, waiting for my helplessness. But I calmly wiped my face, reached into my pocket, and took out something that made him scream in horror. He definitely didn't expect that turn of events. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The $50,000 figure hit me like a slap. Then Lester corrected himself. 500,000. $500,000 for his latest scheme. Dad, I need 500K. This is an investment in the future. His voice carried that familiar edge of entitlement as he paced across my living room, designer shoes clicking against the hardwood. Martha and I had refinished 20 years ago. I remained seated in my leather armchair by the fireplace, the biography of Churchill still open in my lap. At 72, I'd learned the value of measured responses. Son, I don't have that kind of liquid cash available. Lester stopped mid-stride, his angular face twisting with frustration. He ran fingers through his thinning hair, inherited from my side, though he'd never acknowledge it. What do you mean you don't have it? You sold your real estate business for millions. That money is invested, diversified, not sitting in a checking account waiting for your next brilliant idea. I kept my voice steady, watching his agitation build like storm clouds. Then liquidate some. This app will revolutionize food delivery, AI-powered route optimization, predictive ordering. His hands gestured wildly, painting invisible screenshots in the air. I have investors lined up, but I need seed capital to show commitment. The fire crackled between us, casting dancing shadows that reminded me of other winter evenings when this room held warmth instead of tension. Lester, your track record with investments... Don't, he pointed at me with the aggression of a man cornered. Don't throw my past mistakes in my face. This is different. This is my chance to finally break through. Finally break through. As if his comfortable suburban life with Victoria represented some kind of hardship. As if the private school educations I'd funded, the cars I'd helped purchase, the down payment assistance for their Evanston townhouse, none of that mattered because his third business venture had failed. I understand you're passionate about this, but I can't risk. Then sell this old house. It's too big for you anyway. The words came out sharp, calculated. He'd been building to this suggestion. You're rattling around in here like a ghost. Get a nice condo. Maybe one of those senior communities with activities. The room went silent except for the soft hiss of burning oak. I felt my jaw tighten, my hands gripping the book's leather binding. This house is my home. I lived here with your mother. Mom's been gone 5 years, Dad. 5 years. His voice rose, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. You can't live in a shrine forever. Be practical. The real estate market is hot. You could clear 1 million easy, maybe more. 1 million easy. As if the kitchen where Martha taught him to make pancakes was just square footage. As if the backyard where we'd played catch held no more value than its property assessment. I'm not selling my home, Lester. Something shifted in his expression then, disappointment hardening into something uglier. You're too old and stubborn to understand modern business. While you're sitting here clutching your memories, real opportunities are passing by. He grabbed his coat from the sofa, movements sharp with barely controlled anger. Victoria was right. You've become impossible to reason with. The front door slammed with enough force to rattle the picture frames on the mantel. Through the bay window, I watched his BMW's headlights sweep across the snow-covered driveway before disappearing into the January night. I sat there listening to the house settle around me, the fire's warmth unable to chase away the chill his words had left behind. The clock on the mantel ticked past 8:30, marking the end of what I'd hoped might be a pleasant father-son visit. Instead, I'd seen something in Lester I'd been trying to ignore for months, the cold calculation of a man who viewed his own father as nothing more than an obstacle to his ambitions. The biography slipped from my lap as I leaned back in the chair, suddenly feeling every one of my 72 years. The empty whiskey glass sat on the side table where I'd left it, amber residue catching the dying firelight. My legs felt heavy as I pushed myself up from the armchair, joints protesting the movement. The house seemed larger in the aftermath of Lester's departure, rooms stretching into shadows that hadn't existed an hour before. I made my way to the library, switching on the brass reading lamp Martha had given me for our 20th anniversary. The yellow glow warmed the oak shelves lined with first editions and family photographs. This room had always been my sanctuary, the place where important decisions were made, where I'd planned business strategies and pondered life's complexities. The photo album rested on its usual shelf, thick with memories and bound in worn leather that had softened with years of handling. I pulled it down carefully, feeling its familiar weight, and settled into the burgundy reading chair by the window. The first page opened to Lester at age 3, gap-toothed and grinning as he took his first wobbly steps across this very library floor. Martha's handwriting in white ink below. March 15th, 1993. Our boy is walking. I could almost hear her delighted laughter echoing in the room. I turned the page slowly, reverently. Lester at 5, straddling his first bicycle in the driveway, my steadying hand barely visible at the bike's edge. He'd been so determined to ride without training wheels, tears of frustration turning to squeals of joy when he finally found his balance. "Daddy, I want to be just like you." The memory of his voice, clear and admiring, seemed to whisper from the photograph. My fingers traced the edge of another picture, our fishing trip to Lake Geneva when he was 12. He'd caught his first bass that day, holding it up with pride while I beamed behind him. We'd spent hours on that boat, talking about everything and nothing, the kind of easy conversation that flows between fathers and sons when the world feels perfectly aligned. The scotch I'd poured sat untouched on the side table as I continued through the pages. High school graduation, Lester in his cap and gown, class salutatorian. College acceptance letter celebration at Romano's, his favorite restaurant then. His first job offer, the pride in his eyes when he'd called to share the news. When had it changed? When had that bright-eyed boy who'd wanted to be just like his father transformed into the man who'd stood in my living room tonight, viewing me as nothing more than a source of funding? I found the wedding photos near the back, Lester handsome in his black tuxedo, Victoria radiant in white silk. Even then I'd sensed something calculating in her smile, though I'd dismissed it as pre-wedding nerves. Martha had whispered during the reception, "She'll be good for him, Eldon. She'll help him focus." Focus? Yes, Victoria had certainly helped him focus on money, status, and what his inheritance might buy them. The pages grew heavier as I flipped through recent years. Fewer photos, shorter visits, conversations that revolved increasingly around financial markets and investment opportunities, rather than family and shared memories. When had I become the bank of Dad, rather than simply Dad? I closed the album gently, but couldn't bring myself to return it to the shelf. Instead, I held it against my chest, feeling the weight of all those captured moments, all that love and hope and promise that seemed to have evaporated somewhere between childhood dreams and adult realities. The clock chimed 10:30, its brass pendulum catching the lamplight as it swung back and forth with mechanical precision. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the garden where Martha and I had planted roses, where we dreamed of watching grandchildren play someday. Where did I go wrong? When did my boy become this stranger who saw my home as merely an asset to be liquidated? I poured 2 fingers of Macallan into my glass, the amber liquid catching the light like liquid gold. The scotch burned slightly going down, warming me from the inside as I sat surrounded by the ghosts of better times, wondering if the son I'd raised with such love and hope still existed somewhere beneath the man who'd walked out my door tonight. Morning light filtered through the kitchen windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor as I measured coffee grounds with the precision of a chemist. The familiar ritual of grinding, measuring, and brewing had become my anchor in the hours since sleep had finally claimed me around 2 a.m. The coffee maker gurgled to life while I stood at the window, watching cardinals pick at the seed I'd scattered yesterday. Snow covered the birdbath Martha had positioned just so, creating what she'd called a winter postcard view from our breakfast nook. Steam rose from my mug as I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where I'd eaten thousands of meals, read countless newspapers, and made some of the most important decisions of my life. This morning felt different, though, charged with the clarity that sometimes follows a sleepless night of painful reflection. When exactly had Lester changed? The question had circled through my mind like a persistent fly, demanding attention, The wedding. That's when it started. I could see it now with the brutal honesty that only comes with distance and disappointment. Those first months after the honeymoon, when Victoria's influence began reshaping my son's priorities, like water wearing away stone. Subtle at first, missed Sunday dinners because of previous commitments, phone calls that grew shorter and more perfunctory. Dad, you don't understand the modern world. His words from last Christmas dinner echoed in my memory. Victoria had smiled approvingly when he'd said it, her manicured fingers resting possessively on his arm. I walked to the oak secretary desk Martha had inherited from her grandmother, pulling open the bottom drawer where I kept old correspondence. Lester's letters from college lay bundled in a shoebox, tied with the blue ribbon Martha had used to organize everything in our house. His handwriting had been careful then, eager. Dear Dad, thank you for the tuition check. I know you're sacrificing for my education, and I promise to make you proud. I can't wait to work alongside you in the business someday. Work alongside me. When had that dream died? When had partnership become replacement, then dismissal? The transformation hadn't been sudden. It had been a gradual erosion of respect and affection, carefully cultivated by a woman who saw my accumulated wealth as her future security. Victoria's complaints about my interference in their marriage, her suggestions that I was too involved in Lester's business decisions, her gentle but persistent campaign to position me as an obstacle rather than an asset. The coffee had grown cold in my cup, but I hardly noticed. Pieces of a puzzle I'd been too willfully blind to see were finally clicking into place. The increasingly rare phone calls that came only when financial assistance was needed. The birthday visits that felt obligatory rather than loving. The way Lester's eyes had grown calculating when he looked at me, as if appraising inventory rather than greeting his father. When did money become more important than love? The kitchen clock showed nearly 9 a.m. Somewhere across town, Lester and Victoria were probably planning their next approach, discussing strategies to convince the stubborn old man to liquidate his assets for their benefit. The thought should have hurt more than it did, but instead I felt something unexpected settling in my chest, a cold, hard determination I hadn't experienced since my early days in real estate, when competitors had underestimated the quiet man with the careful smile. I'd built an empire through patience and strategic thinking. I'd outlasted flashier developers and weathered market crashes that had destroyed men half my age. Perhaps it was time to remind my son that his father hadn't accumulated wealth by being anyone's fool. The phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. The caller ID showed Lester's number, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. Instead, I picked up on the fourth ring. Hello, son. Dad. His voice carried none of last night's anger, replaced instead by the careful charm he'd perfected in recent years. I wanted to apologize for my outburst yesterday. Victoria and I would like to take you to dinner tonight. Bella Vista, your favorite. We need to talk. 7 days of silence stretched between that cold January evening and the moment my phone rang again. I'd spent the week maintaining my routines, morning coffee in the kitchen, afternoon reading in the library, evening walks through the snow-covered neighborhood. But underneath the familiar patterns, my mind worked like a chess player studying an opponent's strategy. The call came while I was washing dinner dishes, the simple ritual of warm water and soap providing comfort after another solitary meal. Lester's name appeared on the caller ID, and I let it ring 3 times before answering. Hello, son. Dad. His voice carried none of last week's anger, replaced instead by something carefully modulated. I've been thinking about our conversation. Victoria and I would like to take you to dinner tomorrow night. Bella Vista, your favorite. We need to talk. Bella Vista. He remembered it was where Martha and I had celebrated our anniversary each year. The gesture felt calculated, like everything else about this call. About what exactly? I kept my tone neutral, professional, the voice I'd used in difficult real estate negotiations. About your future, Dad. I'm genuinely worried about you, living alone in that big house. We want to discuss some options that might make your life easier. Options. Such a careful word, pregnant with implications he wasn't yet ready to reveal. All right, Lester, 7 o'clock. Perfect. I'll make the reservation. After hanging up, I stood in the kitchen holding the cordless phone, studying my reflection in the darkened window. 7 days had given me time to think, to plan, to make certain preparations. Perhaps it was time my son learned that his father hadn't accumulated wealth by being anyone's fool. That evening, I selected my clothes with the same care I'd once chosen attire for crucial business meetings. The navy suit Martha had helped me pick out 3 Christmases ago. She'd said it made my eyes look younger, a burgundy tie that suggested prosperity without ostentation. In the mirror, I saw not the helpless old man Lester apparently expected, but a businessman who'd outmaneuvered sharper opponents than his own son. From the oak secretary in my study, I retrieved the manila envelope I'd placed there after my morning revelations. Inside, documents I'd had prepared by my attorney, plus something else, something that would remind everyone present just how much they stood to lose by underestimating me. The taxi arrived promptly at 6:30. As Chicago's skyline grew larger through the window, I felt the familiar weight of important papers in my jacket's inner pocket. Tomorrow would bring either reconciliation or a lesson in consequences. Either way, my son was about to learn that some fathers still had teeth. Bella Vista's warm lighting and soft jazz couldn't mask the tension waiting for me at table 7. Lester rose as I approached, his smile too wide, too practiced. Victoria remained seated, her perfectly applied makeup reflecting the candlelight, as she offered a wave that belonged in her social media videos. "Dad, you look wonderful." Lester's embrace felt rehearsed, a performance for nearby diners rather than genuine affection. I took the chair they'd left for me, facing the wall, I noticed, while they commanded views of the restaurant's entrance and windows. Even the seating arrangement felt strategic. "Victoria, you're looking well?" I nodded to my daughter-in-law, whose phone lay prominently beside her water glass, screen up and ready. "Oh, Eldon, we're so glad you agreed to meet." Her voice carried that sticky sweetness she'd perfected for difficult conversations. "We've been terribly concerned about you." Concerned? There was that word again, the same careful language Lester had used on the phone. They'd clearly rehearsed this conversation, perhaps even assigned roles. The waiter took our drink orders. Wine for them, water for me. I'd learned long ago that important negotiations required complete clarity of mind. As he departed, Lester leaned forward with what he probably thought was paternal concern. "Dad, Victoria and I have been discussing your situation. Living alone in that house, no family nearby if something happens." "Nothing has happened, son." I kept my voice level, though my fingers found the envelope's edge through my jacket fabric. "I'm perfectly capable." "Are you, though?" Victoria's interruption came with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Honestly, Eldon, when was the last time you had a proper medical evaluation? You're 72. 72? She said it like a death sentence, her phone tilting slightly as if recording our conversation for some future purpose. Lester reached beneath the table, retrieving a leather briefcase I hadn't noticed before. The metallic clicks of its opening echoed like gunshots in the intimate restaurant space. "We found a solution," he said, placing a stack of papers between us, with the flourish of a magician revealing his final trick. "Sunset Haven. It's a beautiful facility. Private rooms, medical staff on site, activities programs." The words hit me like physical blows. Sunset Haven, a nursing home. I lifted the top document with hands that remained steady despite the earthquake occurring beneath my ribs. "We've already completed most of the paperwork," Victoria added helpfully. "The admission process can take weeks, but we've expedited everything. You could move in this Friday?" Friday, 3 days away. I read through the forms with the careful attention I'd once devoted to million-dollar contracts. Medical assessment recommendations, financial authorization forms, living will modifications. My signature required in a dozen places, but theirs already adorned every page where family consent was needed. "You've been busy," I managed, my voice sounding hollow in my own ears. "We want what's best for you, Dad." Lester's tone carried the patience of a parent explaining simple concepts to a slow child. "The house is too much responsibility. The money from selling it will ensure you have excellent care for the rest of your life." The rest of my life. How efficiently they'd planned it out. My home sold, my independence eliminated, my wealth managed by loving family members who demonstrated such tender concern for my welfare. "I'm not going anywhere," I said quietly. placing the documents face down on the white tablecloth. Victoria's laugh tinkled like wind chimes in a storm. "Oh, Eldon, don't be stubborn. It's already arranged. I will not allow you to control my life." The words came out stronger than I'd intended, causing heads to turn at neighboring tables. Lester's face darkened, his careful facade cracking like ice under pressure. "Control your life?" He leaned forward aggressively, his voice rising. "Look at yourself. You can barely manage a simple conversation without getting confused and defensive." "I'm not confused about anything, son." I pushed the nursing home documents back toward him with deliberate calm. "I understand exactly what you're attempting to do." Victoria's phone lifted slightly, angling toward us, as if she were capturing evidence of my supposed instability. Her lips curved in anticipation, like a cat watching a mouse stumble into a trap. Lester's coffee cup sat half full beside his bread plate, steam still rising from the dark surface, his fingers wrapped around the handle with white-knuckled intensity. "You want proof you can't take care of yourself?" His voice carried a dangerous edge I'd never heard before, something wild and desperate that transformed my son into a stranger. "Fine, here's your proof." The coffee cup moved in slow motion, Lester's arm rising with theatrical precision. The hot liquid arced through the restaurant's warm air, catching the candlelight like a brown rainbow before splashing across my face and chest. The heat hit first, not scalding but sharp enough to make me flinch involuntarily. Coffee ran down my cheek, soaking into my burgundy tie and navy jacket. Drops scattered across the white tablecloth like evidence at a crime scene. "Look!" Lester slammed the empty cup back onto its saucer with enough force to crack the porcelain. "I just threw coffee on you, and you're too old and weak to even respond. You just sit there like a helpless child." Victoria's delighted laughter cut through the restaurant's shocked silence. "Exactly. He can't even defend himself. This is exactly what we mean about his deteriorating condition." Around us, conversation had stopped. Waiters froze with plates balanced on their arms. A woman at the next table covered her mouth in horror, while her companion reached for his phone, though whether to call security or record the spectacle remained unclear. I reached for my napkin with movements that felt mechanical, robotic. The crisp linen absorbed coffee from my cheek, while my mind processed what had just occurred. My own son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle, whose college tuition I'd paid, whose business failures I'd forgiven time and again, had just humiliated me in public to prove I was helpless. The coffee stains spread across my shirt like dark flowers blooming in fast forward. I could smell the bitter aroma mixed with Victoria's perfume and the restaurant's garlic-scented air. My hands moved with deliberate precision, folding the soiled napkin into a neat square before placing it beside my untouched water glass. Lester sat back in his chair with savage satisfaction, his breathing heavy from adrenaline and rage. "There. Now everyone can see what we're dealing with. An old man who can't even protect himself from a simple accident." Victoria nodded eagerly, her phone now openly recording. "This will be perfect documentation for the medical evaluation, clear evidence of diminished capacity to respond to basic social situations." The maitre d' approached our table with careful steps, his professional composure intact, despite the obvious distress in his eyes. "Sir, is everything all right? Would you like us to call?" "Everything's fine," I said quietly, my voice carrying clearly in the unnaturally silent restaurant. "Just a family discussion that got a bit heated." I reached into my jacket's inner pocket, feeling the crisp edges of documents that represented 7 decades of careful planning and strategic thinking. My fingers closed around papers that would remind everyone present, particularly my son and his calculating wife, that some fathers still possessed very sharp teeth indeed. The napkin folded into a perfect square beneath my fingers, each crease deliberate and precise. Coffee stains darkened my shirt like badges of my son's cruelty, but my hands remained steady as I placed the linen beside my water glass. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of 72 years and the eyes of every patron in Bella Vista upon me. Lester leaned back in his chair with savage satisfaction while Victoria held her phone like a weapon, ready to document my inevitable breakdown. Instead, I reached into my jacket's inner pocket. The check emerged crisp and pristine, its white surface catching the restaurant's warm lighting. $1 million, written in my careful script, dated 3 days ago. Pay to the order of Lester Dean, my son's full name in blue ink that had dried with such hope. This $1 million check was meant for your new business venture. My voice carried clearly across the suddenly silent dining room. I had it prepared, after our first conversation, before I understood what you'd become. Lester's smugness evaporated like steam from his coffee cup, his eyes fixed on the check with the intensity of a drowning man spotting shore. Dad, what are you? But now I see you're not worthy of it. The first tear came easily, clean, and satisfying, splitting the check lengthwise through the $1 million amount. You threw coffee on your own father to prove he was helpless. No. What are you doing? Lester lunged forward, his chair scraping against hardwood as he reached desperately across the table. His fingers grasped at air while I held the two halves beyond his reach. Victoria's phone clattered to the floor, her social media instincts overwhelmed by the reality of watching a fortune disappear. Eldon, stop! We can discuss this. We can work everything out. The second tear was crosswise, creating 4 perfect pieces that fluttered like autumn leaves onto the white tablecloth. Each fragment contained a portion of the astronomical sum that would have solved all their financial problems, funded Lester's dreams, secured their suburban comfort. Too late. You chose your path when you decided I was nothing more than an obstacle to your inheritance. I scattered the pieces across the table's surface, creating a paper mosaic of destroyed opportunity. You wanted to put me in a nursing home and sell my house. You humiliated me in public to prove I was incapable of defending myself. Lester's hands scrambled among the check fragments, like a child trying to reassemble a shattered toy. We can tape it back together. Banks will honor reconstructed checks with proper documentation. Banks don't honor checks that never existed. I brushed a final coffee droplet from my cheek with quiet dignity. Goodbye, son. The maitre d' stepped aside as I walked toward the exit, my stride steady despite the evening's revelations. Behind me, I heard Victoria's sharp whisper and Lester's desperate calculations, already plotting their next move in a war they'd started but couldn't win. The Chicago night air felt clean against my face as I stepped onto the sidewalk, leaving behind not just a restaurant, but a relationship that had died the moment my son chose greed over love. In my jacket pocket, the real documents remained safely tucked away, papers that would ensure this evening's lesson was only the beginning of their education. Some fathers raise their children with gentle guidance. Others must teach harder lessons about respect, dignity, and the consequences of betraying family trust. My son's real education was just beginning. March arrived with the promise of spring, though winter's chills still lingered in Chicago's morning air. 3 weeks had passed since the restaurant incident, 3 weeks of relative quiet that felt like the calm before a storm I knew was coming. I was tending to my morning coffee ritual when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Mrs. Henderson from 2 houses down, clutching her mail with the purposeful stance of someone bearing news. Good morning, Eldon. Her smile carried that peculiar mix of concern and curiosity that signals neighborhood gossip. I hope you don't mind me stopping by, but I've been hearing some troubling things. The coffee maker gurgled behind me as I invited her into the foyer, keeping the conversation away from my private spaces. What sort of things, Dorothy? Well, several people have mentioned you might be having some health issues. Memory problems, perhaps? She shifted her weight from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable with her role as messenger. People are worried about you living alone. Memory problems. So it had begun. I appreciate the concern, but I feel wonderful. My mind is as sharp as ever. Her relief was visible but temporary. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. Though I have to ask, are you remembering to take your medications? There was some talk about missed prescriptions. Medications I'd never been prescribed for conditions I didn't have. The campaign was more sophisticated than I'd expected. After Mrs. Henderson left, the phone rang, then rang again, and again. Eldon, it's Frank Morrison from the Real Estate Association. His voice carried professional concern wrapped in genuine friendship. Listen, I got a call from your son yesterday. He mentioned you've been having some trouble managing your finances. Asked if I knew any good elder care advisors. Frank, we'd done business together for 20 years. Lester contacted you directly. He seemed genuinely worried, said you'd been forgetting to pay bills, getting confused about bank statements. I told him you'd always been sharp as a tack, but his pause spoke volumes. Well, people change as they age. No shame in getting help. 3 more calls followed the same pattern. Different friends, identical concerns, all traced back to conversations with Lester. Each caller had been approached separately, fed specific stories about my declining capabilities, my inability to manage basic tasks. By afternoon, I understood the scope of their campaign. Systematic, coordinated, designed to create a paper trail of community concern that could support legal action. I opened my laptop, a skill that apparently contradicted their narrative about my technological incompetence, and searched for Victoria's social media accounts. What I found was a masterpiece of manipulation. Facebook posts about family challenges and difficult decisions about aging parents. Instagram stories seeking advice for when elderly relatives refuse help. Carefully crafted content that painted her as a devoted daughter-in-law, struggling with an obstinate old man who couldn't recognize his own limitations. The comments section revealed the true genius of her approach. Dozens of responses from friends and strangers offering sympathy, sharing similar experiences, reinforcing the narrative that I was a typical elderly person in denial about declining abilities. So heartbreaking when they lose insight into their own condition. Have you considered guardianship proceedings? Sometimes it's the only way to protect them. My mother was the same way. You're doing the right thing by intervening. Each comment built upon the others, creating a digital monument to my supposed incompetence. Victoria had crowdsourced my character assassination, turning social media into a weapon of family destruction. I took screenshots methodically, building my own evidence file while my phone continued ringing with concerned friends and acquaintances. Each call followed the script Lester had provided. Memory issues, financial confusion, safety concerns, family worry. By evening, I had 17 documented contacts, 6 social media posts, and a clear picture of their strategy. They were building a case for incompetency, gathering community support for intervention, creating justification for the very nursing home placement they'd outlined at Bella Vista. But they'd made one crucial error in their campaign. They'd assumed I was the helpless old man they wanted me to be, incapable of recognizing sophisticated manipulation or mounting an effective defense. I dialed my attorney's number, listening to the familiar ringtone while organizing my evidence files. Some wars are fought with weapons. Others require strategy, documentation, and the careful application of legal expertise. The law offices of Peterson, Klein, and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a downtown Chicago high-rise, their mahogany-paneled conference room overlooking Lake Michigan's gray waters. I spread my documentation across the polished table while my attorney, Sarah Peterson, reviewed each piece with professional precision. Elder abuse statutes are quite clear, Eldon. She adjusted her reading glasses, examining Victoria's social media screenshots. Defamation, harassment, attempted financial exploitation, they've created an impressive case against themselves. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Lester and Victoria plotted my legal downfall, they'd been documenting their own crimes, but they weren't finished yet. That afternoon, I received a call from Citizens Bank's security department. Mr. Dean, this is regarding your son's visit yesterday. He claimed you were suffering from dementia and attempted to access your accounts as your caregiver. Lester had moved beyond gossip into concrete action, testing whether his public narrative could override bank security protocols. The attempt had failed. My accounts remained secure behind layers of protection I'd established decades ago, but it revealed the escalation of their campaign. 2 days later, a social worker knocked on my door. Mr. Dean, I'm Jennifer Walsh from Chicago Department of Aging Services. We've received reports of concern about your welfare. She was younger than Victoria, professionally dressed, carrying a tablet, and the air of someone accustomed to difficult home visits. I invited her in, recognizing this as another battlefield in my son's war. The reports suggest possible cognitive decline, medication management issues, and family concerns about your safety living alone. Her tone was neutral, clinical. I'm here to conduct a welfare assessment. For the next 2 hours, she tested everything: memory recall, problem-solving abilities, financial management skills, medication knowledge, home safety awareness. I performed each task with the competence of a man who'd run multiple businesses and managed complex real estate portfolios for 4 decades. Mr. Dean demonstrates excellent cognitive function, maintains his home appropriately, and shows clear understanding of his financial affairs. She typed into her tablet, no evidence of the reported concerns. The medical examination came next, arranged by Lester through his attorney, but conducted by my physician of 15 years. Dr. Martinez had seen me through pneumonia, Martha's cancer, and the natural changes of aging. His assessment was thorough and unambiguous. Physically robust for 72, cognitively sharp, no signs of dementia or medication management issues. Patient demonstrates complete capacity for independent living and financial decision-making. Each professional evaluation strengthened my position while weakening theirs. But Victoria's social media campaign intensified in response, her posts growing more dramatic as reality contradicted their narrative. Heartbroken by failed intervention today, when elderly relatives manipulate professionals, families feel helpless. Elder care, family, struggles. Another setback in getting Dad the help he needs. The system fails when seniors present well during evaluations but struggle in daily life, seeking advice from others who face similar challenges. She was spinning their defeats as evidence of the system's failure to protect vulnerable elderly people, maintaining her victim narrative while escalating public pressure. Meanwhile, Lester visited 3 different attorneys, seeking someone willing to file guardianship proceedings with insufficient evidence. Each consultation cost him money he couldn't afford while producing the same result. No competent lawyer would take a case this week, but failure only made them more dangerous. "Your father will regret opposing us," I overheard Lester tell Victoria during a phone call I'd recorded, legally since it occurred on my property, when they'd come to collect Victoria's forgotten purse from their restaurant ambush. Victoria's response chilled me more than his threats. Social media is just the beginning. If legal channels won't work, we'll find other ways to make his life impossible. I sat in my library that evening, surrounded by documentation of their failed attacks and growing threats. Professional evaluations proved my competence. Legal consultations confirmed their case's weakness. Financial institutions protected my assets. Yet something in Victoria's voice suggested they were preparing to abandon legal pretense entirely. I opened my safe one more time, retrieving documents I'd hoped never to use. If they wanted to escalate beyond law and reason, they would discover that some old men had sharper teeth than their aging appearance suggested. The real war was about to begin. The mahogany conference table at Peterson, Klein and Associates gleamed under the afternoon sun streaming through downtown Chicago's towering windows. I spread my carefully organized files across its polished surface, while Sarah Peterson reviewed each document with the methodical precision that had earned her reputation as the city's premier elder law attorney. "Are you absolutely certain about this decision, Mr. Dean?" She looked up from the draft will modifications, her reading glasses reflecting the afternoon light. "Complete disinheritance is irreversible once properly executed." "Absolutely certain." I straightened the papers with deliberate care. "My son has demonstrated his true character through months of systematic harassment. These documents prove it." She nodded, turning to the evidence file I'd compiled. Screenshots of Victoria's defamatory social media posts, audio transcripts of Lester's threatening phone calls, witness statements from neighbors about their intimidation campaign, medical and social service reports confirming my complete competency. "This harassment documentation is comprehensive," she murmured, scanning through bank security reports about Lester's attempted account access. "Combined with the failed guardianship attempts, you have a strong case for justifiable disinheritance." 2 hours later, I signed the new will with 2 witnesses present, watching my son's name disappear from my estate in favor of the Chicago Children's Education Foundation, the Elder Care Advocacy Group, and the Harold Washington Library Improvement Fund, organizations that would use my wealth to help people rather than exploit them. The documents felt heavier in my briefcase as I returned home, carrying the weight of 72 years of accumulated wisdom and the bitter knowledge that some children grow into strangers who wear familiar faces. That evening, I dialed Lester's number from my study, The same room where I'd once planned his college education and dreamed of working alongside him in the family business. "Dad?" His voice carried cautious hope, probably wondering if months of legal failures had finally broken my resistance. "Son, I've been thinking about everything that's happened between us." I kept my tone carefully measured, neither hostile nor warm. "I want to discuss our future together, all of it." "Finally!" Relief flooded his response. "I knew you'd come to your senses eventually, old man. Victoria said you were just being stubborn, but I told her you'd see reason." Old man. Even in what he believed was victory, he couldn't resist the casual cruelty that had become his trademark. "I have a surprise for you," I continued, opening my briefcase to check that the new will copies were ready. "Let's meet tomorrow evening at Bella Vista, 7 o'clock. I want to settle everything between us once and for all." "Bella Vista? That's perfect, Dad. Same place where we had our misunderstanding. Very symbolic." Misunderstanding. His euphemism for throwing coffee in my face while attempting to force me into a nursing home. "Bring Victoria," I added. "She should hear what I have to say." After hanging up, I sat in the gathering dusk, surrounded by the books and memories that had sustained me through months of family warfare. Tomorrow night would end this conflict permanently, but unlike my son's crude attacks, my resolution would be built on law, documentation, and the kind of strategic thinking that had made me successful long before he was born. I opened the safe one final time, retrieving the envelope that contained not just legal documents, but the crystallized essence of a father's disappointment transformed into decisive action. Some lessons are taught with patience and understanding. Others require the swift, clean cut of consequences that can't be negotiated, manipulated, or undone. Bella Vista felt different as I entered with my document folder tucked under my arm, the same warm lighting, the same soft jazz. But this time I walked through the dining room as a man armed with truth rather than hope. The maitre led me to table 7, the same table where my son had humiliated me 3 months ago. Lester and Victoria were already seated, their faces bright with anticipation. They'd dressed well for what they believed would be their victory dinner, Lester in his best suit, and Victoria wearing jewelry I'd probably helped finance through past generosities. "Dad, you look wonderful." Lester stood to embrace me, his performance of filial affection almost convincing. "I'm so glad we're finally going to work everything out." Victoria beamed beside him, her phone discreetly positioned for what she undoubtedly planned to document as their triumph over the stubborn old man. I placed my folder on the table between us, with the same deliberate care I'd once used for major real estate contracts. "I promised a surprise. Here it is." The first document I removed was a copy of my new will, dated just yesterday and bearing the official seal of Peterson, Klein and Associates. I placed it directly in front of Lester, watching his eager expression falter as he began reading. "This is impossible." His voice cracked as he reached the disinheritance clause. "You can't do this to me." "I can, and I have." I withdrew the second set of documents, evidence of their harassment campaign compiled over months of careful documentation. "I also have complete records of your attempts to destroy my reputation, access my accounts, and force me into institutional care." Victoria's face drained of color as she recognized her own social media posts, printed in crisp black and white, time-stamped and annotated with legal precision. The careful cultivation of community sympathy, the false claims about my mental state, the coordination with Lester's manipulation, all laid bare in professional documentation. "We'll challenge this in court," she shrieked, loud enough to turn heads at neighboring tables. "You're clearly not competent to make these decisions." I smiled for the first time that evening, opening the folder's final section. Using what evidence? These medical evaluations confirming my complete competency? These social service reports clearing me of all concerns? Or perhaps these bank security records showing Lester's failed attempts at financial fraud? Each document landed on the table like a nail in their coffin. Professional assessments from doctors, social workers, and attorneys. Audio transcripts of Lester's threatening phone calls. Screenshots of Victoria's defamatory posts with legal analysis of their libelous content. Lester grabbed the will copy, scanning desperately for loopholes that didn't exist. The Chicago Children's Education Foundation, the elder care advocacy group. You're giving everything to strangers instead of your own son. I'm giving my wealth to organizations that help people rather than exploit them. I leaned back in my chair, feeling lighter than I had in months. Organizations that understand the difference between care and manipulation. Victoria's composure shattered completely. This is insane. We were your family. We were trying to help you. By attempting to have me declared incompetent, by spreading lies about my mental state, by trying to force me into a nursing home to steal my house. I gathered the documents methodically, my voice never rising above conversational level. Help usually doesn't involve public humiliation and financial fraud. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. Months of systematic harassment documented with the precision of a successful businessman who'd learned to protect himself from exactly this kind of predatory behavior. Lester's face cycled through shock, denial, anger, and finally a desperate bargaining that would have been pathetic if it weren't so calculating. Dad, please. We can fix this. I'll change. Victoria will apologize. We'll prove we deserve. You've already proven what you deserve. I stood, leaving the documents scattered across the table like debris from their demolished dreams. Goodbye, Lester. Goodbye, Victoria. The last thing I heard as I walked away was Victoria's hysterical sobbing and Lester's frantic whispers about lawyers and appeals, the death throes of greed disguised as family love. Outside, Chicago's spring air felt clean and full of possibility. 3 months later, I sat in the children's section of the Harold Washington Library, surrounded by a circle of eager young faces as I turned the pages of Where the Wild Things Are. June sunshine streamed through tall windows, warming the reading corner where I'd become a regular volunteer. Mr. Dean, will you read us another story? Asked Sophie, a 6-year-old with pigtails and gap-toothed enthusiasm. Of course, sweetheart. Which one would you like? The children's excitement was infectious, their genuine affection a balm for wounds I hadn't realized needed healing. These weekly reading sessions had become the highlight of my week, proof that some relationships could be built on joy rather than obligation. After the children were collected by their parents, I walked 3 blocks to Romano's Cafe, where my Tuesday lunch group was already assembled. Frank Morrison waved me over to our usual table by the window. Eldon, you look better every time I see you. Margaret Chen, a retired teacher, smiled warmly as I joined them. Retirement suits you. Freedom suits me, I corrected gently, settling into my chair with the contentment of a man who'd finally learned the difference. We discussed books, gardening, and the upcoming library fundraiser, where my donation would fund a new children's reading program. Simple conversations between people who enjoyed each other's company without hidden agendas or financial calculations. That afternoon, I worked in my garden, tending the tomatoes and roses that Martha had planted years ago. The house felt alive again, filled with friends who stopped by for coffee and neighbors who borrowed books from my extensive library. The same rooms that had echoed with loneliness now hummed with genuine human connection. Inside, I found a stack of letters waiting on my desk. Thank you notes from the charitable organizations that had received my donations, each one detailing how the money was being used. Scholarships for underprivileged children, medical research funding, elder care advocacy programs that protected vulnerable seniors from exactly the kind of exploitation Lester and Victoria had attempted. One letter particularly caught my attention, from a young woman whose college tuition had been covered by the Education Foundation. Her gratitude was honest and specific, describing how the scholarship had changed her family's entire trajectory. This was legacy, not the entitled inheritance my son had demanded, but real impact on lives that needed hope rather than handouts. As evening approached, I sat in my library with a cup of tea and the latest biography I'd been enjoying. The phone remained blissfully quiet. No desperate calls from Lester begging for reconciliation. No threats from Victoria about legal challenges that would never materialize. Just peaceful silence broken only by the gentle tick of the mantel clock and the rustle of turning pages. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Henderson tending her roses next door. She waved when she spotted me, the simple gesture of a neighbor who'd become a friend after the toxic family drama had ended. Community connections built on mutual respect rather than blood obligation. The documents in my safe remained untouched. Legal protections I'd never need to access because the threat they'd been designed to counter had eliminated itself through its own greed and cruelty. Sometimes the best victories were the quiet ones, where justice emerged naturally from the choices people made, rather than the punishments they received. I'd spent 72 years learning that family meant more than genetics, that love required respect to survive, and that some relationships were too toxic to salvage, regardless of their history. The hardest lesson had been discovering that protecting yourself from exploitation sometimes meant accepting the loss of people you'd once treasured. But in releasing that poisoned connection, I'd found space for relationships that nourished rather than drained, friends who appreciated rather than calculated, and a community that valued contribution over inheritance. The summer evenings stretched ahead, full of quiet pleasures and genuine peace, the kind of contentment that money couldn't buy but wisdom could create. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.